In the quiet town of Millfield, nestled among the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia, 22-year-old Sarah Collins walked into the local blood donation center with the simple intention of helping others. The summer of 1998 had brought record floods to neighboring counties, and the call for blood donors echoed throughout the region. Sarah, a biology student at the state university, understood the importance of such donations better than most. The donation center was housed in a converted Victorian home, its clinical interior at odds with the ornate exterior. As Sarah completed her preliminary paperwork, the attending nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes named Martha, conducted the routine screening questions. "Any recent illnesses or medications?" Martha asked, pen hovering over the form. "No, I'm healthy as can be," Sarah replied, smiling. The questions continued standard procedure until Martha reached the medical history section. "Any known genetic disorders in your family?" Sarah hesitated. "Well, my younger brother has a rare blood condition. The doctors said it was genetic, but I've been tested and I don't have it." Martha nodded, making a note. "What about your parents or grandparents? Any history of hemophilia, sickle cell or other blood disorders?" "Not that I know of," Sarah said. "Though my grandmother on my father's side did have some health issues. She died before I was born." After completing the questionnaire, Sarah underwent the standard blood typing and screening tests. The procedure was routine until it wasn't. An hour later, Martha returned with a puzzled expression and another healthcare professional, Dr. Roberts, who introduced himself as the center's medical director. "Ms. Collins," he began, his voice measured and professional, "we've found some unusual markers in your preliminary blood work that require further investigation. Nothing immediately concerning, but we would recommend a more comprehensive genetic screening before proceeding with donation." Sarah's heart quickened. "What kind of markers? Is something wrong with me?" Dr. Roberts exchanged glances with Martha before responding. "There are certain homozygous gene expressions that suggest a higher than typical degree of genetic similarity between your parents. This can sometimes indicate consanguinity in a family line." The clinical term hung in the air between them. Sarah, with her biology background, understood immediately what he was implying. "That's impossible," she whispered, feeling the color drain from her face. "My parents aren't related." "These are just preliminary findings," Dr. Roberts assured her. "But the genetic patterns we're seeing typically appear in individuals whose parents share unusually close genetic material, closer than would be expected in unrelated individuals." Sarah left the donation center that day with a referral for comprehensive genetic testing and a storm of questions brewing in her mind. The drive back to her apartment passed in a blur of confusion and disbelief. Her parents, David and Ellen Collins, had always seemed so ordinary. Her father, a hardware store owner, her mother, a high school English teacher. They had grown up in different parts of the state, or so she had always been told. As she entered her small apartment, Sarah's gaze fell on a framed family photo on her bookshelf. It showed her parents, herself, her brother Michael, and her paternal grandparents at a family reunion 5 years earlier. She studied their features with new scrutiny. Her father's distinctive hazel eyes, the same unusual shade as her grandfather's, the high cheekbones that she, her brother, and her grandmother all shared. Features that ran in the family, she had always thought innocently. Now those similarities took on a disturbing new context. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Who could she even talk to about this? What questions could she even ask? The implications were too devastating to contemplate, yet as the shock began to subside, a determination took its place. If there was a secret hidden in her family's past, she needed to uncover it, not just for her own peace of mind, but for her brother's health and for any children she might someday have. Little did Sarah know that her routine attempt to donate blood would unravel a complex web of family secrets spanning 4 generations. Secrets that had been carefully guarded in the isolated hollows of Appalachia, where some communities had turned inward for far too long. Are you subscribed to this channel yet? The disturbing true stories we uncover expose the darkest corners of human behavior that mainstream media won't touch, stories that could save you or someone you love from becoming victims of similar situations. Hit subscribe now to join our community of truth seekers. Armed with questions and uncertainty, Sarah spent the next week gathering courage before driving to her hometown of Cedar Ridge, a journey of just over 2 hours from her university apartment. She had told her parents she was coming home for the weekend to gather some books she'd left behind, but her real purpose was far more complicated. Cedar Ridge was a town of barely 3,000 people, where coal mining had once been the primary industry before economic decline had set in during the 1980s. The Collins family had deep roots here. Her father's parents had lived in the same two-story farmhouse on the outskirts of town for over 50 years, and after they passed, her father had kept the property, unable to part with his childhood home. It was to this house that Sarah drove first, using the spare key her father had given her years ago. The property stood empty now, except during holidays when the entire family gathered. Its weathered clapboard exterior and wraparound porch spoke of a different era, when large families needed room to grow and privacy from neighbors was measured in acres, not feet. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon sunlight that penetrated the heavy curtains. Sarah moved through the quiet rooms, up the creaking staircase to the attic, where family records and memorabilia had accumulated over generations. Her grandfather, Joseph Collins, had been meticulous about family documentation, a habit formed during his years as the town's notary public. The attic was stifling in the summer heat. Sarah pulled the chain on a bare bulb, illuminating stacks of boxes and old furniture. She knew what she was looking for: the large trunk containing family albums, birth certificates, and correspondence that her grandfather had maintained. The brass clasp on the trunk had grown stiff with disuse. When Sarah finally managed to open it, the smell of old paper and mothballs wafted out. On top lay albums of black and white photographs, their pages stiff and yellowed. She set these aside carefully, digging deeper for official documents. An hour into her search, Sarah found a folder labeled Family Certificates in her grandfather's precise handwriting. Inside were birth certificates, death records, and marriage licenses, the paper trail of the Collins family history. She scanned the documents, looking for her parents' marriage certificate first. There it was: David Collins and Ellen Pierce, married June 12, 1975. Nothing unusual there. She continued backward in time, examining her grandparents' documents next. Joseph Collins had married Margaret Wilson in 1952. Sarah frowned, trying to remember if she had ever heard her grandmother's maiden name before. Wilson was common enough, but something tugged at her memory. She continued her search, finding her great-grandparents' records. Thomas Collins had married Rebecca Wilson in 1927. Wilson, the same surname as her grandmother. Sarah's hands began to tremble as she sorted through more documents, finding her great-great-grandparents' marriage certificate from 1902, James Collins and Mary Wilson. 3 generations of Collins men had married Wilson women. It could be coincidence. Wilson was not an uncommon name in this region, but the timing and proximity raised disturbing possibilities. Deeper in the trunk, Sarah found a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. The correspondence, spanning from 1900 to 1950, was between various members of the Collins and Wilson families. As she read through them, a clearer picture began to emerge, one that confirmed her worst fears. The Wilson family had established a neighboring farm to the Collins property in the late 1800s. Over time, the two families had become deeply intertwined, not just as neighbors but as business partners, and eventually, repeatedly, as in-laws. The isolated geography of the region, combined with the close proximity of the two homesteads, had created a disturbing pattern of intermarriage. One letter from 1930, written by her great-grandfather Thomas to his brother, referred explicitly to keeping the bloodline strong and preserving the land between our families. The language was dressed in terms of protecting family interests, but the implications were unmistakable. As the afternoon light began to fade, Sarah uncovered one final damning piece of evidence: a family tree diagram drawn by her grandfather Joseph, showing the complex interrelationships between the Collins and Wilson families. Lines connected individuals across generations, creating a web rather than the typical branching pattern of a family tree. According to this document, her parents shared a great-grandfather. Sarah sat back on her heels, the papers scattered around her telling a story she had never imagined. The genetic markers that had appeared in her blood test suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't an anomaly or mistake. They were the accumulated result of generations of consanguineous marriages, creating a concentration of shared genetic material that had finally become detectable in her generation. And then she remembered her brother's blood disorder, the rare condition that doctors had struggled to identify. Was this connected to? The thought sent a chill through her, despite the attic's oppressive heat. As dusk fell, Sarah carefully returned the documents to the trunk, her mind racing with questions about how to proceed. She had come seeking answers, but had found only more disturbing questions. How much did her parents know? Was her brother's condition a direct result of this family history? And how many others in her extended family might be affected by similar genetic issues without even knowing why? The weight of 4 generations of secrets now rested on her shoulders. Sarah descended the attic stairs with the terrible knowledge that her family's past was far more tangled and troubling than she could have ever imagined. The following morning, Sarah sat at her parents' kitchen table, cradling a mug of coffee between trembling hands. She had spent the night in her childhood bedroom, sleep evading her as the documents from the attic replayed in her mind. Now, as sunlight streamed through the gingham curtains her mother had sewn years ago, she waited for her parents to join her for breakfast, and for the conversation she dreaded but knew was necessary. Her father entered first, his work boots heavy on the linoleum floor. At 53, David Collins still maintained the sturdy build of a man accustomed to physical labor, though his dark hair had long since given way to grey. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, pouring himself coffee. "You're up early for a Saturday." "Couldn't sleep," Sarah replied, watching him closely. How much did he know? How much had been hidden from him? Her mother appeared moments later, her reading glasses perched on top of her head, a habit from years of classroom teaching. Ellen Collins moved efficiently around the kitchen, pulling out ingredients for pancakes, Sarah's favorite since childhood. "Mom, Dad," Sarah began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to talk to you about something important." The serious tone caught their attention immediately. Her father lowered his newspaper. Her mother paused at the stove. "I went to donate blood last week," she continued. "They found some unusual genetic markers that suggest—" She took a deep breath. "That suggest consanguinity in our family." The silence that followed was deafening. Her father's face remained impassive, but her mother turned away, her shoulders suddenly tense. "I went to Grandpa's house yesterday," Sarah pressed on. "I found the family records. The marriage certificates, the letters. I know about the Collins and Wilson families." Her father set down his coffee mug with deliberate care. "Sarah," he began, his voice low, "some things in the past are better left there." "Better left there?" The words burst from her. "Dad, Michael has a blood disorder that 3 specialists haven't been able to properly diagnose. I just learned that I might be carrying genetic mutations. This isn't about the past, it's affecting us right now." Her mother turned back, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't know," she whispered. "Not at first." "What do you mean you didn't know?" Sarah demanded. Her parents exchanged glances, a silent communication born of decades together. Finally, her father sighed deeply. "Your mother and I met at college in Charleston," he explained. "We didn't grow up knowing each other, despite what you found in those records. The Wilson connection. It was several generations back. When we brought you 2 home to Cedar Ridge, that's when my father took me aside." "Joseph told us the history," her mother continued, her voice gaining strength, "about how the Collins and Wilson families had intermarried for generations, but he swore our connection was distant enough not to matter. We were already married, already had you. What were we supposed to do with that information?" Sarah stared at them, trying to process this revelation. "But you kept having children. You had Michael after you knew." Her father's face crumpled. "The doctors said the risk was minimal. 1 in thousands, and we wanted another child so badly. Then Michael got sick," her mother said softly, "and we started to wonder." The kitchen fell silent again, the pancake batter forgotten on the counter. Outside, birds called to each other, oblivious to the family crisis unfolding inside. "Does Michael know any of this?" Sarah finally asked. "No," her father replied firmly, "and we'd prefer to keep it that way. His condition is manageable. Why burden him with this?" Sarah stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Because he deserves the truth. Because he might want to have children someday. Because this isn't just about us. It's about breaking a cycle that's gone on for far too long." Her outburst hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Her mother reached for her hand across the table. "Maybe you're right," Ellen conceded, "but understand that we made the best decisions we could with what we knew at the time. We never meant to hurt either of you." Sarah's anger deflated slightly in the face of her mother's obvious distress. "I know that," she said more gently, But now we have to deal with this, all of us. The conversation continued for hours, painful revelations alternating with long silences. Her parents shared what they knew of the family history, how economic hardship, geographical isolation, and misguided notions about keeping property in the family had led to the pattern of intermarriage, how Joseph Collins had eventually recognized the dangers but had chosen secrecy over public acknowledgement, how the tight-knit community had either not noticed or chosen to look away. By afternoon, a plan had begun to take shape. Sarah would complete her genetic testing. The family would consult with genetic counselors. Michael would be told the truth when the time was right, with professional support available. The cycle of secrecy, at least, would end with their generation. If you've ever discovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew about yourself, type "Truth matters more than comfortable lies" in the comments. Your words might give someone else the courage to face their own family's hidden past. The implications of Sarah's discovery extended far beyond her immediate family. As summer gave way to fall, the Collins family embarked on a difficult journey of medical consultations and emotional reckonings. The genetic testing confirmed what the blood donation screening had suggested. Sarah carried several recessive genes that, while not immediately dangerous to her health, could pose significant risks should she have children with someone sharing similar genetic markers. Michael's testing revealed more troubling news. His blood disorder, previously classified as an unusual variant of von Willebrand disease, was actually a rare condition resulting directly from genetic mutations concentrated through generations of consanguinity. The revelation devastated the 20-year-old college sophomore, who had always struggled with his health but had never understood why. "So I'm basically a walking testament to inbreeding," he said bitterly during a family session with their genetic counselor, Dr. Patel. "Great family legacy." "That's not how we should frame this," Dr. Patel corrected gently. "You're experiencing the effects of historical practices that were once common in many isolated communities, not just in Appalachia, but worldwide. The important thing is that we now understand the cause, which gives us better options for treatment." Indeed, with the correct diagnosis, Michael's condition became more manageable. Specialized medications replaced the general treatments that had only partially addressed his symptoms. For the first time in his life, he experienced what it meant to feel truly healthy. But the medical ramifications were only part of the story. As Sarah dug deeper into her family's history, consulting county records and historical societies, she began to understand the broader context of what had happened. The Collins-Wilson intermarriages weren't an isolated case. Throughout the hollows and valleys of West Virginia, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, geographical isolation combined with economic necessity had created multiple pockets of consanguineous relationships. Mining companies had established company towns where workers lived in close proximity, often with limited transportation to other communities. Multiple generations would remain in the same location, the pool of potential partners increasingly restricted to those within walking distance. Sarah discovered historical medical records from the 1940s, when a traveling doctor named Harlan Moore had documented unusually high rates of specific congenital conditions in several Appalachian communities. His findings, controversial at the time, had suggested that consanguinity might be to blame. Rather than addressing the root causes, however, local authorities had suppressed his reports, fearing stigmatization of their communities. This pattern of secrecy and shame had allowed the practice to continue unchecked in some areas well into the 1970s, when improved transportation and changing social norms had finally begun to break the cycle. Sarah's parents had been caught at this historical turning point, their relationship a bridge between the isolated past and the more connected present. As winter settled over West Virginia, Sarah expanded her research into genealogical databases and DNA matching services. The results were sobering. The genetic signatures of the Collins-Wilson intermarriages appeared in dozens of individuals across 3 states, many of whom likely had no idea of their shared ancestry or the potential health implications. Ethics dictated that she couldn't contact these distant relatives directly, but she could ensure that accurate family trees and medical histories were available should they ever conduct their own searches. Working with genetic counselors and medical ethicists, Sarah developed protocols for sharing information while protecting privacy. During this period, Sarah's relationship with her parents underwent a profound transformation. Initial anger gave way to a complex empathy as she came to understand the circumstances that had shaped their choices. Ellen and David Collins had been products of their environment, carrying forward patterns established long before their birth. Their failure had not been in their ancestry, which they couldn't control, but in perpetuating the secrecy that had allowed harmful practices to continue. "I've been thinking about Grandpa Joseph," Sarah told her father one evening as they sat on the porch of the family home, watching snow dust the fields beyond. He knew enough to be worried about the family history, but not enough to break the pattern completely. Her father nodded slowly. Joseph was a complicated man. He grew up in a time when family loyalty was valued above almost everything else. The idea of airing dirty laundry, that's how he would have seen it, would have been unthinkable. "But that silence caused harm," Sarah persisted. "To you, to Michael, to who knows how many others." "Yes," her father acknowledged, his breath fogging in the cold air. "That's the hardest part to accept, that protecting the family's reputation ultimately hurt the family itself." This conversation marked a turning point. The Collins family began to discuss how they might use their experience to help others. Not through public exposure. The small-town dynamics of Cedar Ridge made that approach too fraught with potential for misunderstanding, but through anonymous support for genetic research and counseling services in rural Appalachia. As winter thawed into spring, Sarah presented her senior thesis, Genetic Isolation in Rural American Communities, Historical Patterns and Modern Implications. Her research, carefully anonymized but drawing deeply from her family's experience, won recognition from the university's genetics department and an offer of graduate study. For Sarah, the academic recognition was secondary to the personal mission that had taken shape. Her accidental discovery at the blood donation center had set her on a path she could never have anticipated, one that would eventually lead her to become an advocate for genetic counseling in underserved rural communities across America. 5 years after her fateful visit to the blood donation center, Dr. Sarah Collins stood before an audience of medical professionals at a conference on rural healthcare access. Now 37, with a PhD in genetic counseling and a position at the National Institutes of Health, she had become a leading voice in addressing the overlooked genetic health concerns of isolated communities. "The patterns we've documented aren't unique to Appalachia," she explained, gesturing to the data projected behind her. "From the hollows of Kentucky to isolated fishing villages in Maine, from certain religious communities in Utah to forgotten pockets of the Ozarks, geographical isolation combined with economic necessity has created similar genetic patterns across the country." The presentation outlined her team's work: mobile genetic counseling clinics that traveled to underserved areas, educational programs for rural healthcare providers, and confidential testing services that allowed individuals to understand their genetic risks without fear of community stigma. The key, Sarah emphasized, is breaking the cycle of silence. These aren't problems of the distant past. They're affecting real people today, people who often don't understand why certain health conditions persist in their families. As she fielded questions from the audience, Sarah reflected on how far her own family had come. Michael, now 25 and effectively managing his blood condition, had become a high school science teacher with a passion for genetics education. Their parents had found purpose in quietly supporting rural health initiatives, channeling their guilt into constructive action. The Collins family had made peace with their history without excusing it. They had learned to distinguish between blame and responsibility, acknowledging that while they couldn't change the choices of previous generations, they could take responsibility for breaking harmful patterns. After the conference, Sarah returned to Cedar Ridge for a rare family gathering. The old Collins farmhouse had been renovated, the attic where she had discovered the family secrets, now converted into a bright office space where her father managed the small foundation they had established to fund genetic counseling for low-income families. That evening, as they sat around the dining table that had hosted Collins family meals for generations, Sarah looked at the faces of her loved ones, her parents, showing the signs of age but more at peace than she had seen them in years, Michael and his fiancée Kate, who had met through a support group for people with genetic blood disorders, cousins from the extended family who had initially resisted but ultimately embraced the difficult truths Sarah had uncovered. "I've been thinking about great-great-grandfather James Collins," her father said, breaking a comfortable silence. The man who started this whole pattern back in 1902. I used to be so angry at him, but now I wonder if he even understood what he was setting in motion. Probably not, Sarah agreed. The science of genetics was barely understood then. They were making decisions based on cultural practices and economic needs, not medical knowledge. Still, Michael added, it's hard not to wonder how different things might have been if someone had broken the pattern sooner. The conversation continued late into the night, weaving together threads of family history, medical science, and personal reflection. There was sadness for what had been lost through generations of secrecy, but also pride in the healing they had achieved. As the gathering wound down, Sarah stood on the porch, gazing at the same Appalachian hills that had witnessed her family's complicated history. The isolation that had once trapped them now seemed more geographical than absolute. Roads connected the valley to distant cities, internet service brought the world to their doorstep, medical knowledge illuminated what had once been hidden in shadow. The Collins family story was not ending but transforming, from a cautionary tale of consanguinity and secrecy to a testament to the power of truth and the possibility of healing even the most deeply rooted family wounds. Sarah had learned that breaking generational patterns required not just knowledge but courage, the courage to face uncomfortable truths and to choose a different path forward. In the quiet of the evening, she made a silent promise to the future generations of her family. The cycle ends here. The secrets have been brought to light. The healing has begun. And whatever children may someday join this family tree will inherit not just genes but also truth, the most powerful tool for ensuring that history does not repeat itself. If you've watched all the way to the end, it's because you connected with this powerful story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and understand who truly appreciates the stories on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. These real hidden histories deserve to be brought into the light. Like and share this video to help others understand that family secrets can have consequences that span generations. Together, we can break the cycles of silence that allow harmful patterns to continue.